Welcome back to Racing Rundown here on YouTube. I'm Eric DeCoster. In this Breeders' Cup preview, we'll be taking a look at the newly minted Grade 1 Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. $1 million purse, the first of the 14 Breeders' Cup races across the weekend, the first of 5 on Friday. Race 6 of 10 on the Friday card from Keeneland. Very exciting group. It's the Breeders' Cup race I'm certainly the most excited for. It's a full field of 12. Plus 3 also eligibles that I'll briefly mention towards the end, just like we do with every preview. We'll go through every horse, give them the highs, the lows, basically like a verbal past performances with our own little touches of insight on them. Once again, at the end of the day, just trying to help you guys make better informed decisions when you handicap these races. But of course, we'll throw in my 2 cents at the end. We'll start with the one really fun European contingent in here. They have certainly come to play in a big way. And it starts with the one Lady Hollywood. Maybe a little bit more lower regarded than her European counterparts, but a filly with some positives to her. She's won 4 of her last 5 starts. That's a great starting point. And she's going to like this distance. It's so ticky-tack with some of these Euros in the sprint distances, it feels like, when they ship over. Some of their 5 furlong horses feel more like 6.5 furlong horses here. Some of their 6 furlong horses feel more like milers if they ran in the U.S. on a consistent basis. But Lady Hollywood fits the bill of a 5.5 furlong sprinter like she'll get to do in here. And she's coming off a sharp win in a Group 3 at Longchamp in her most recent start. Field wasn't great, but she looked good enough in that spot. I might add, one of her wins did come around a left-handed turn back in June, her first career win. So I think that's another positive. You can take away a horse that had experience around a turn. It's crazy how much that seems to matter in these sprints with horses that have never done it before. The one big concern, though, for Lady Hollywood, and a reason that she probably is a cut below compared to her counterparts from overseas as well as the American contingent in here, is her run 2 back. The Group 2 loather at York in mid-August. She ran like a horse that was going to factor early on. She was traveling nicely, but when the going got good late in the game, she just flattened out. And it felt like for any particular reason. It just felt like she was a cut below the best in there. That being said, that was over 6 furlongs. And as I was saying earlier, she is a more true 5 furlong horse who's going to relish this distance. So I think maybe you can look at it through that lens. I know every horse I mentioned, full transparency, every horse I mentioned, it's going to sound like a horse I'm going to use. And I think that's fair. It's such a deep and tough race that's kind of how you have to approach it. But I think she's realistic in one sense if you're going on the distancing. I always get a little hesitant when talking about the Euros in these races because there's just not a solid sample size to go off of for the juveniles, and for one, and for two, Euros in general just struggle in American turf sprints. That's just how history has gone. That in the same token, you go back to the 2020 Breeders' Cup, Euros actually ran well. The Ohlers in the regular turf sprint, the main turf sprint for the 3-year-olds and up, Euro won it. The juvenile race, they all ran pretty well underneath. 3rd and 4th place finishers were strong contingent from Europe. So that's my overriding little tangent there on the Europeans. But point is, Lady Hollywood, not the worst to consider. It's going to be interesting, though. Will she break with the field? I don't know. She's not really the quickest gate horse, and there'll certainly be speed coming from the outside we'll touch on in a second. The 2 is Love Reigns. These are the headliners, right? Wesley Ward, Irad Ortiz Jr., they've run this race 4 times. They have won 3 of them, including the last 3 in a row, with a pretty solid lineup, 4-wheel drive, Golden Pal, and last year Twilight Gleaming, also for Stone Street Stables, also a filly. So tons of things to respect when it comes to Love Reigns on connections alone. And then you look at her resume, and it is there. Broke her maiden by 9 3/4 over the Keeneland Turf course. About as impressive of a maiden win as you'll see. And how about the form? The 3rd place finisher in there, Delight, she's going to be one of the favorites for the Juvenile Fillies Turf. So I know we're going all the way back to May, but that is just, or April I should say, but that is impressive. That is impressive form coming from Love Reigns. And then she shipped over to Ascot, well backed in the Queen Mary, ran her race. It was just tough. They went hard on the front end, and at that point in time, she just didn't rate well. The blinkers were on. She couldn't get toned down by Irad Ortiz. And she ran a game 4th. It looked like she was going to back out a lot tougher than she did. She stuck around, but, it was a disappointing loss. But next time, comes to Saratoga for her prep for the Breeders' Cup. Able to rate a little bit off of a very quick filly from the John Terranova barn who set the pace. She rated wonderfully from an inside post. blinkers, weren't the overriding factor there. She was able to relax despite them, whereas it felt it was forcing her in the Queen Mary, and then she just drew off and won. It was very impressive. And what I think is also impressive is the fact that she's coming into that race with this much time, because she was entered to run it in the Indian Summer. That's the local prep for this race. And Wesley Ward scratched her, basically saying, I think she's ready. And for a guy who's won this race and is so good with turf sprinters, and his horses love this Keeneland track, that's all I need to hear. I mean, she's totally a player off of all these factors. She'll have to beat boys for the first time. That'll be interesting, but she's been so good to this point and get such good horses. I think she absolutely makes a lot of sense in here. The 3 Private Creed was a very big beneficiary from Love's Rain's scratch in the Indian Summer because he took it out. He's had a really nice off-the-pace trip, something he's been able to utilize in every single start of his career, and he was able to come with a good late push and win. It was a strong performance, back-to-back stakes wins. He's banked over $500,000 this year. Just a really sturdy, solid horse. And let's not forget, Steve Asmussen, it was just 2 years ago, over this Keeneland course, he was second with a very similar horse, Cowan. So tons of similarities to draw there, and obviously a horse who might even be in better form than that one. Maybe the one concern is the Skidmore, 3 starts back at Saratoga. According to the notes and watching the replays, of course, you can see he did get bumped around a little bit, but nevertheless was overmatched by Oxymore, who is also in this race. And I think it's fair to question a little bit what he's beaten. These Europeans, Love Reigns, a couple others, have very solid horses they've beaten. Private Creed, not so much. The Juvenile Turf Sprint race at Kentucky Downs, it was really just him and Sharp Aza Tack, and then it was everybody else. And in the Indian Summer, I'm a little surprised he wasn't favored on it. It felt like he was a standout once Love Reigns was taken out. But point being, I think quality of competition is a bit of concern, and the one loss to fellow competitors in here also concerned. The big benefit, in addition to his good form, I will say, is his ability to come from off the pace. I said that's been the tactics every race. He's very responsive to the jockey's commands in every single start he's made. And in a race that seems like there's a ton of pace on paper, from outside, inside, you name it, it's there. This is a horse who's going to benefit well from it. So I'm very intrigued to see how he will perform from a pace standpoint. For Dramatised, another European, ships in for Carl Burke. Ryan Moore picks up the mount. This was the best 2-year-old filly in Europe. A lot of people thought this summer, and that's because she won the Queen Mary so nicely at Royal Ascot back in June. Came from slightly off the pace, picked up when it mattered, and then drew off to a very cozy win, following a very good maiden win as well. Then came the Lother, a race we already talked about with Lady Hollywood, who was well beaten there, and as an even money favorite, just dropped. I mean, she just never put up a fight, it felt. And she ran 5th, only beaten about 3 lengths, but still, you would have liked to have seen her be a lot tougher in there. So that was a very interesting race. I think she's a good bounce-back candidate. She does have to answer the run around a turn question, the European form question. Can she quicken up in time to win this? I think it's fair to say she could run a credible race, but there just feels like there's a lot of questions to answer from that last race, and I just don't know if she can do it. Maybe she's a little bit better going 5.5. That's what she gets to do in here, but it's really tough to rely on form all the way back from June. There's just, that's a big question I think has to be answered. So she's really intriguing from a talent standpoint, just the recency is not there. The 5, Mischief Magic, 5 starts, 3 wins, and the connections are certainly what stands out here. Charlie Appleby, William Buick, Godolphin. We know what they did last year. We know what they're trying to do again this year. And I don't know if this is the horse necessarily to do it. When I was talking about that 6 furlong type from Europe, that's probably a better miler. Mischief Magic absolutely fits that bill. He's a big, rangy horse. Seems like he needs all the ground he can get. And if you watch the Middle Park, which is a true 6 furlongs last time out at Newmarket with a bit of a rise towards the wire, he needed every bit of the 6 furlongs. So now you're going to cut him back over a track that's just flat and around a bend. I don't see how that benefits him. Now, he is a winner around a turn. He did win a Group 3 on a Tapeta surface 2 starts ago in early September. It was a strong win, but it also left me thinking, okay, he needs a little bit more distance. So he doesn't get that. That's my concern. He, just like Private Creed, though, will benefit from a quick pace. That is absolutely going to play out into his hand. It's just going to be a question of, can he quicken up enough in time to get there? And I just don't know. It feels like it's just going to be too little too late based off of his running style. He's won nicely. I just don't know if these are the conditions for him to win. Persian Force is the 6th. He was actually won better than Mischief Magic in the Middle Park last time out. He's kept probably the best quality of competition of the field. He's ran in a lot of the major 6 furlong races, pretty much every major 6 furlong race for the 2-year-olds over in Europe, and it's been with some decent success. We'll go all the way back to 5 starts. The Coventry, good second. Won the Group 2 July Stakes, very strong win. The 3rd place finisher in there was Mysterious Night, the winner of the Summer Stakes a month and a half ago at Woodbine, a horse who would have been a favorite in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf if they ran there. Then he placed in back-to-back Group 1s behind Little Big Bear and Blackbeard. I mean, those are really the 2 best horses at this distance of this crop in Europe. And then in the Middle Park, he chased home Blackbeard and the Antarctic, another good horse as well. So he's kept the right form with the right horses. I do just question the adaptation to the American style of racing, if he can be quick enough for it. He's a horse who is, kind of that stalking pressing, but he'll occasionally lead type, which is a very good thing. I mean, you certainly like to see that, but he's not a quick gate horse, and to me that means he can get swallowed up very early in a race that has a lot of speed, and that's just not something you really want from a horse. He reminds me a lot of a horse I actually picked last year in this race, and that was Armour, who was shipping in from Europe. Same trainer, ridden by Frankie Dettori this time around. Ryan Moore was aboard Armour last year, but very similar qualities, except the problem was he just couldn't adapt to the American style of racing in his first start in it. So that's kind of my knock on him, on who he's faced alone and some of the things he's shown in his best races. 100% a player. The big knock 100% comes in if you draw those comparisons to other runners. Then he's kind of a horse you have to look past, because certainly a big aspect of the Europeans not running well is not being used to the American configuration, and I just don't know if he is. Number 7 is Oxymore. Actually, very interesting. Chad Brown's first representative in the history of this race. Oxymore, a horse who has an interesting background. Broke his maiden in early July 1st to be exact, at Belmont by 6.5. I mean, it was a dominant maiden win. And then he was privately purchased from that race, and he bounced back. First start for Chad Brown, won the Skidmore over this distance at Saratoga by a length and a quarter, and beat Private Creed. Nonay Hudson, who's on the AEs in this race, was second, so did some good work there. And then in the now, stretching out to a mile at Monmouth, the $500,000 race, pressed a pretty heady pace and stuck around and was only beaten a half length by Webslinger, who runs in the Juvenile Turf later on in this card. So a horse who's really not done anything wrong, but you do wonder how he will handle cutting back in distance here. It's really kind of uncharted waters. There's not too many horses I can recall that made a start at around 2 turns and then cut back to the Juvenile Turf Sprint. That's just not an angle we have seen in the first few years of this race. But he's looked really good turf sprinting. I think he might make a little bit of sense. Maybe one I think of more as a B type. And the key will be rating. I think there's so much speed. He cannot run with the speed of a Speedboat Beach, a Sharp as Attack, Tyler's Tribe, Platinum Queen, and even some to the inside like a Lady Hollywood, and stick around. He's just not that fast. So if he's able to come from off the pace, that'll certainly put him in better position. But as things stand, that it's kind of just a more wait and see thing. And this race is so deep, you have to go with things you feel are more known commodities than those that you're going to project to do something better this time round. The 8 American Apple, 47-1 winner of the Grade 3 Matron at Belmont at Aqueduct Meet in her last start. You look at it though, and you almost are like, why was she 47-1 in there? Because she broke her maiden very nicely at Kentucky Downs the start before that, and the figure came back weak. But the Kentucky Downs figures are just untrustworthy when it comes to evaluating talent, because they're just never strong. But that was a good win for American Apple. She beat a decent field in the Matron, and I mean the 2-3 finishers in there were also the 2-3 finishers in the Bolton Landing that Love Reigns won. So that's really intriguing to me, because while Love Reigns definitely put him away easier, I think it also kind of shows American Apple can run with some decent horses that ran with one of the favorites in this race. So she's won her last 2 starts impressively. It was her only 2 efforts turf sprinting. A little interested to see how she does. This is the shortest she'll have raced on the turf, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Another pretty impressive part of this is the buyer. I think I always like to evaluate speed figures really stand out. And that 87 she threw out in there, that's only 2 points off of Love Reigns. I mean, that's really not a big difference, and it's better than most of the other last starts for the Americans. So certainly some intriguing angles here. I don't know if she's a player, but because this is still a step up in class, and she, once again, wasn't as dominant as Love Reigns, and that's the easiest comparison to make, of course, but certainly some intriguing aspects to American Apple's game. 9 Sharp Aza Tack, a horse who was second in the Kentucky Downs Juvenile Turf Sprint in his most recent start. That was a loss to Private Creed after chasing the pace in there. His first 2 starts were really good, though. Flat 5, one at Santa Anita, one at Monmouth, both dominant victories. So maybe cutting back in distance is beneficial here, and I'm sure Tyler Gaffalione will have him hard on the gun to get out and be on the lead in this race, because that was the weapon that worked so well in his first 2 starts. I think that's very intriguing, but I think he's going to be a casualty from a hot pace at the end of the day. There's just so much pressure. He couldn't really withstand it in the Juvenile Turf Sprint, and this being such a tough group, I'm just not sure if he can. If he can just break away and go faster than everybody else, maybe. But I just don't see that being the case in here. The 10 is Tyler's Tribe. Best story in horse racing right now. A story that I obviously connect well with. This horse is an Iowa bred. I'm from Iowa, Iowa bred, if you will. He's won all 5 of his starts at Prairie Meadows. Prairie Meadows was the track that made me a horse racing fan. This horse, he's owned by Iowa people. One of his owners is an Iowa Hawkeye fan. If you look at all the interviews, he's wearing a block eye on his hat with the yellow, so pretty cool there. But the best is the story behind the name, Tyler's Tribe. He's named after a young boy named Tyler who has leukemia, and thankfully has gone through all of his treatment. But his treatment took place at the Stead Family Children's Hospital, which is in Iowa City. That's the hospital that when there's a football game after the first quarter, they'll wave to the hospital because all the patients can see down into the stadium. It's the best tradition in college football. So just really cool connections here. And this horse is pretty good too. He's 5 for 5. He's won every start by open lengths. It's been a mixture of Iowa breds and not in a couple weaker stakes, but he's taking care of business. He's very talented. I think this is a touch too much for him. I think first-time turf, it's a very unknown commodity. Pedigree-wise, he should be able to handle it. I mean, Sharp Aza Tack was also by Sharp Aza Tack, and he handled the grass just fine in 2 starts. Don't see why Tyler's Tribe can't do the same. He's been so good. I'm just concerned that this is a very deep rendition of the Juvenile Turf Sprint, and I don't know if he's going to be able to withstand the pressures he'll be facing in here. It'll be a tough race. He's a good horse. We talked about the known commodities. He feels very unknown and very untrustworthy in here, but he'll certainly be who I'm rooting on the most to win this race. The 11 Speedboat Beach, he's going to be one of the reasons Tyler's Tribe will have a difficult time. That's because he has a lot of speed to burn. When he broke his maiden 2 back at Del Mar, it was freaky, near freaky. He broke a track record. He went to the front and never looked back. He beat some very well-bred horses in behind him, and he 104 Beyer. I mean, that is tremendous for a first-time starter. The Speakeasy felt like a regression, but I think that was only because he missed the break. He kind of, crow hopped out of there, found himself in stride, chased a really fast horse named Palladic, who just tons of speed to burn, and so there were things that were working against him, and he still ran a very credible race. And I think he's going to be much better in here than he was in the Speakeasy. And I don't think it's surf. I've seen some people throw around that maybe the surface is what got after him. I don't agree. I think it was more so missing the break and having to chase that horse. He'll be much better set in here, but I also am concerned maybe that the other speed in here could soften him up. He felt invincible after his first win. He felt a lot less invincible after the Speakeasy. So I think he's one you use for sure because he might just be that good, and he's certainly better than the Speakeasy, but I think that there's also reason to believe he could be beatable should he, not get any better from that weird run in the Speakeasy, if that makes sense. Once again, certainly a horse I think I'm going to use more defensively, though, because there is a lot of talent there. And the 12 is the Platinum Queen. I mentioned the good European form. That was really against the 2-year-olds because the Platinum Queen has made 2 starts against elders and has really flourished, which obviously crazy to say that about a 2-year-old doing so well against horses that are so much more experienced than her. But she's proven herself. Kind of humble beginnings, worked her way up. She was a huge long shot, for instance, in the Queen Mary, that dramatized one, and that Love Reigns was 4th, and she was 13th. I mean, she never factored, but she's just gotten a lot better since then. Second in the Group 1 Nunthorpe, that was against Olders, was beaten just a nose in the Flying Childers. where she ran a bang-up race there, and then beat the Olders for the first time in the Prix de l'Aube at Longchamp on ARC weekend. Wire-to-wire, very sharp winner there. I am concerned, though. The draw was bad enough, but you also were just concerned. She gets out of the gate well, but can't she get out of the gate well enough to be contentious with that other early speed? We haven't really had to see her rate that much in her other races. Really, the only time was those first two starts, but she got a lot better when they would just let her go. So she's not going to be able to do that. And then the outside post means she's going to be wide throughout. There's a lot of speed to her inside that's going to make life difficult. So she seems very beatable. I don't think she's going to go off anywhere near favorite because of that, despite being the morning line favorite. I think that the post absolutely throws a wrench into that. She's not going to be able to get optimal position unless nobody breaks to her inside or she's really just that fast. But I just don't see it. That European speed cannot run with the likes of a Speedboat Beach, Tyler's Tribe, Sharp as a Tack, so on and so forth. So that's concerning. Plus the wide trip. The talent's there, just so many questions to answer. And if she's going to go off favored, I want no part of it. Because that's just, if we're playing price alone, she certainly is not going to be beneficial to you because she seems very beatable in here. So that's a favorite I'm pretty heavily against, I think, going with and across the Breeders' Cup, but especially in this race. Now the three also eligibles in case they do get in. Touch on them quickly because we know also eligibles can sometimes get up and win these races. Bushido, the 13, very fast horse from Canada. I think he's a pace player if he gets in. The post will certainly hurt him from that perspective, but he's done nothing wrong in two starts. He's going to like this. He likes this distance. He likes the grass. He's very, very fast. I really think he's a cool horse just in general. And he comes off a strong stakes win that featured an 85 buyer, which totally fits with some of the best in this race. So pace player if he gets in. I think the outside draw would hurt him if he was in the body of the field and drew inside. Maybe more of a player, but cool horse nonetheless. Nonay Hudson would be the 14. He did a couple to go out to get in. He's just kind of been an also ran in 3 straight stakes. Nothing really too exciting about him. There's just always a horse that's better. And then finally, Monsieur Coco. She'd be the last one in. Fausto Gutierrez trying to find another Breeders' Cup runner. Really good wins for this one after losing on debut, including a stakes win 2 back. The end of the summer kind of got jostled around a little bit in the lane, but he was always going to finish behind Private Creed, Mostache, Nonay Hudson, the top 3 in there. So really just so much improvement would be needed to get past those, and even those horses would be long shots in this field. So with that, obviously a very exciting, fun race. I laid out reasons to really go with all 12 horses, and I think that's really fair in this race because there's a lot of potential and promise here. I will go back to what's worked, though. That is the 2, Love Reigns, Irad, Wesley Ward, team up for a 4th straight win. Almost crazy to think it's possible, but with a horse like this, it is. I think that the key will be rating, and I think the Bolton Landing, she showed she's okay with speed coming over on her from the outside and sitting just off of it. I know she was able to get to the outside. It was a very clean trip, but the fact she was able to rate, I think, is so essential in this race. And if Irad Ortiz can just get her to muscle herself down just a little bit from the break, let the speed come over, sit on the inside, make the move in the stretch, save all the ground, she could be a big player. For a little bit of an alternate, a bit of a price play, I would say Private Creed. He's ran good enough. He's probably weaker on figures. I can acknowledge that. But he's a big pace player. And if things do melt down like I think they potentially could, he's the one I'd like to see running. So I will certainly be using him in that regard. So that's it for this Juvenile Turf Sprint preview. Make sure to check out the other 13 previews we have coming across Racing Rundown YouTube, as well as our full picks podcast, if you will, on any podcast network. We'll see you next time here on Racing Rundown.